The wind howled across the high plains like a wounded beast, dragging the snow sideways in long, white ribbons. It was the kind of storm that erased roads, fences, and men alike. A storm that didn't care if you lived or died. Elias Rourke rode through it anyway. His horse's flanks were crusted with ice, breath steaming like smoke. Elias leaned low against the wind, scarf frozen stiff across his jaw. He'd spent 3 months trapping north of the Yellowstone, and he was headed home with little more than a satchel of pelts and a heart full of silence. Then he heard it, a faint cry carried on the wind. At first he thought it was the storm playing tricks. But it came again, softer this time, human. He reined in, scanning the white wasteland. Nothing moved but the snow. Then his horse snorted and stepped toward a drift near a fallen wagon, its wheels half buried in ice. Elias dismounted, boots sinking knee-deep. He brushed the snow aside with his gloves. Underneath, a hand. Small, pale, unmoving. He dug faster. There. A woman, half buried, her skin gray with frost. Her arms were wrapped around a bundle of cloth pressed tight against her chest. A baby's face peeked out, blue-lipped, barely breathing. Elias tore off his coat and wrapped them both, lifting the woman as if she weighed nothing. Her hair was stiff with frost, her lashes crusted white. "Hold on," he muttered, voice rough. "You ain't dying out here." He threw them over the saddle and led the horse toward his cabin, 4 miles through ice and God's own fury. He stumbled more than once, snow biting into his hands, the wind howling like it wanted to take them all. By the time he reached the cabin, his fingers were bleeding, his face raw. He kicked open the door, dropped the latch behind him, and lowered them beside the fire. The woman's lips moved soundlessly. Elias pulled blankets over her and rubbed her arms, then the baby's. The infant's breath fluttered, weak, but there. He fed the fire till it roared, light dancing across the log walls. Hours passed. The storm beat against the shutters, but inside, warmth slowly returned. The woman stirred once, whispering something he couldn't catch. Elias leaned close. "Ma'am, you're safe now." Her eyelids trembled open, blue eyes, clouded, but alive. "Is the baby?" He nodded, breathing fine. "You both will." She smiled faintly, exhaustion pulling her back under. Elias sat by the fire, watching the snow melt off his coat, listening to the small, fragile breath of the child in her arms. He didn't know her name, where she came from, or what storm had thrown her into his path. All he knew was that he'd found 2 lives in the snow, and maybe, by saving them, he'd saved something in himself too. Outside, the wind began to die. When dawn finally came, it was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned. The storm had passed, leaving the whole valley buried under white. The chimney's smoke rose thin and straight, a thread of life against the pale sky. Elias stepped outside to fetch water, his muscles aching from the night's fight with the storm. He glanced back at the cabin, faint light flickering through the shutters, the sound of a baby's soft cry breaking the stillness. It reminded him of something he hadn't felt in years, belonging. Inside, the woman was awake, sitting near the fire, her hair loose and damp. She looked younger now, though the hard miles still clung to her face. The baby slept against her chest. "You found us," she said quietly, voice still raw from the cold. "More like you found me," Elias replied, setting the kettle near the flames. "Any longer out there, and the mountain would have claimed you." She nodded, eyes fixed on the fire. "I thought it already had." Elias poured her a tin of warm broth and offered it. She drank slow, hands shaking. He studied her, the fine stitching of her torn coat, the faint silver band still on her finger. She wasn't a common traveler. There was something about her, the way she held herself, even in exhaustion, like someone used to gentler worlds. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara," she said after a long pause. "Clara Rourke." Elias froze. That name, Rourke, rang like thunder through his skull. His breath hitched, though he kept his voice level. "Rourke?" She nodded, eyes still on the fire. "My husband was Samuel Rourke. We were heading west when everything went wrong." Elias felt the air leave his lungs. Samuel, his brother, the man who'd ridden him a year back, promising to meet him come spring. The one whose trail had gone cold before winter closed in. He turned away, staring into the flames to hide his face. "What happened?" he managed. "Our wagon broke crossing the ridge," Clara whispered. Samuel went for help. I waited. Days passed. Then the snow came. Her voice trembled. He never returned. Elias swallowed hard, the truth burning at the back of his throat. He remembered that ridge, and the frozen body he'd found weeks ago, half buried beneath the drift. A man wearing a torn coat with the letter SR stitched inside. He'd buried him under a lone pine and said nothing to anyone. And now, his brother's wife sat in his cabin, holding his brother's child. He felt sick with guilt, with the weight of it all. He looked at Clara, her face pale but calm, her hand stroking the baby's head. She didn't know. Elias clenched his jaw. He couldn't tell her, not yet, not when she just clawed her way back to life. So he said nothing. He only whispered, "You're safe now, Clara. You and the boy both." But as he turned back to the fire, the weight of that lie settled deep in his chest, heavy as the mountain itself. The days that followed passed like slow thawing ice. Each sunrise brought a little more warmth, a little more sound, water dripping from the eaves, the crackled firewood that wasn't just for survival anymore. Clara grew stronger. The color returned to her cheeks, and the child, Samuel Jr., she called him, learned to smile in the cradle Elias built from pine scraps. She helped him patch the roof, stir the stew, and hum lullabies that softened the silence inside those 4 log walls. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she'd close her eyes and press her cheek against the baby's hair, as if memorizing that one bit of peace life had spared her. Elias watched, wordless most days. He'd never been much for talk, and now, with the secret coiled in his chest, speech felt dangerous. Each time he saw the silver locket at her neck, his gut twisted. The same locket he'd seen around his brother's throat in that frozen grave. One night, the wind picked up again, whispering through the cracks like ghosts. Clara sat near the hearth, sewing a tear in her dress while the baby slept in the cradle. "Tell me about him," Elias said suddenly. His voice came out low, uncertain. "Samuel?" she asked, glancing up. He nodded, staring into the fire. She smiled, faintly, wistfully. He was, laughter, mostly. Always had a plan, always believed things would work out. Said we'd build a ranch where the air smelled of pine and no one would ever go hungry again. Elias swallowed hard. That was Samuel all right, the dreamer, the talker, the one who never saw danger coming until it bit. "He sounds like a good man," Elias murmured. He was. Her eyes dimmed, but he trusted the world too much. When the storm came, he said he'd be right back with help. I believed him. The room fell quiet again, broken only by the pop of sap in the fire. Elias rubbed a hand over his beard, his throat tight. He'd buried his brother with his own hands, marked the grave with a simple cross cut from a wagon plank. And now, every time Clara spoke his name, that cross seemed to burn in his memory. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He stepped outside under a sky of pale stars. The snow glittered like shards of glass, and the ridge loomed far to the north, black against the moonlight. He whispered into the cold, "I found her, Sam. Found her and the boy. I'll keep him safe. That's all I can do." When he went back inside, Clara stirred in her sleep, murmuring Samuel's name. The baby's tiny hand clutched her dress, and the fire cast them both in gold. Elias stood in the doorway, the guilt tightening in his chest. He had saved them, but every kindness, every word, was built on a lie. And lies, he knew, never stayed buried long. By the time the last snow melted from the pines, spring had finally come to the high country. The rivers swelled with meltwater, and the valley turned soft and green again. But inside Elias's chest, the winter hadn't lifted. Clara had begun to laugh again, a quiet, careful sound, like she wasn't sure she had the right. She tended the small garden behind the cabin and walked the meadow with the baby in her arms. Sometimes, when the wind caught her hair just right, Elias had to turn away. She looked too much like Hope, and he didn't deserve to feel it. Then one morning, while he was mending the corral fence, he heard her call his name. Her voice was sharp, frightened. He ran back to the cabin. She was standing by the table, the silver locket open in her trembling hands. Inside, the small sketch of Samuel, the same one Elias had seen that first night. But now, lying beside it, she held something else. A knife. His brother's hunting knife. She stared at Elias, her voice breaking. "Where did you get this?" Elias froze. The truth had been creeping toward this moment since the night he'd carried her from the snow, and now it stood between them, solid as the earth. He set down his tools slowly. "I found it near the ridge," he said, "where I buried him." Clara's knees gave out, and she sank to the floor, clutching the baby. Tears slid down her face without sound. "You knew," she whispered. "All this time, you knew he was gone." Elias knelt beside her. "I didn't know it was him at first. Not till I heard your name. And by then," he swallowed hard. "You'd just come back from death, Clara. I couldn't take hope from you, too." She looked up, eyes red, grief warring with fury. "You should have told me." "I know." His voice cracked. "But I couldn't. I buried him myself. I said words over him. I thought I'd made peace with it, until you showed up at my door." The room fell silent but for the baby's soft breathing. Clara pressed her forehead to the child's hair, sobbing quietly. After a long time, she whispered, "Where is he?" "By the ridge, under a lone pine. You'll see it before the sun sets." She nodded, tears streaking the soot on her face. "Then that's where I'll go." Elias looked at her, feeling the weight of every mile, every secret, every breath since that night. He wanted to beg her to stay, to forgive him, but he knew he had no right. So instead, he said the only thing that felt true, "I'll take you there." They stood together in silence. Outside, the valley shimmered with new life, but for Elias, the spring wind carried only the sound of goodbye. The sun hung low over the valley when they reached the ridge. The snow was gone now, but patches of frost still clung to the shaded gullies, remnants of the winter that had nearly claimed them all. Clara rode ahead, the baby cradled against her chest, his tiny hand gripping the fabric of her shawl. Elias followed behind in silence, leading the horse where the trail grew steep. Neither of them had spoken much since they left the cabin. There weren't words big enough for what lay between them. At last, they came to the tree, a tall, lone pine standing sentinel over the rise. Beneath it, a small wooden cross leaned slightly, carved with the initials SR. Weather had faded the letters, but the mark of a brother's hand was still clear. Clara slid from the saddle, knees trembling. She sank before the grave, brushing the dirt with her fingers as if smoothing her husband's hair one last time. Elias stood a few steps back, hat in hand, head bowed. For a long while, there was only the wind through the pine needles and the faint murmur of the stream below. Then Clara began to speak. Not to Elias, but to the earth. "You said we'd see the ocean one day, Sam," she whispered. "You said we'd have land and a porch that faced the sunrise. I kept walking, just like you told me. I'm sorry you never came back." Her voice broke. She laid a small bundle beside the cross, a child's knitted cap, worn soft from many nights of use. "He's got your eyes," she said, "and your stubbornness, too." Elias turned away, his throat burning. He'd buried men before, comrades, friends, strangers. But watching her grieve was different. It wasn't just loss, it was everything she'd carried through snow and storm, through fear and hunger, through the edge of death itself. When her tears finally stilled, Clara rose slowly. She turned to Elias. "You gave me the chance to say goodbye. I can never repay that." Elias met her gaze, eyes shadowed but steady. "You don't owe me anything." She hesitated, then unfastened the silver locket from her neck. She placed it in his rough hand, closing his fingers around it. "Keep it," she said softly. "He'd have wanted you to." Elias looked down at the locket. The sketch inside, the faces of a brother and a dream long buried under snow. "And you?" he asked quietly. Clara glanced toward the horizon, where the light was turning gold. "There's a settlement 2 days south. I'll start there, for his sake." She looked at her child, smiling through the tears. "And for mine." He nodded. No promises, no long farewells, just understanding. She mounted her horse and began to ride. Elias watched until the trail bent out of sight, her figure swallowed by sunlight and distance. Then he knelt beside the grave and placed the locket at its base. "You were right, brother," he murmured. "Some storms don't end, they just change shape." As the wind whispered through the pine and the baby's distant cry faded into the valley, Elias stood alone beneath the open sky. The snow was gone, but its memory, cold, merciless, and strangely forgiving, would never leave him.